What exactly is the boy crisis, as described by Dr. Warren Farrell in his recent book on the subject? How does a lack of a father figure affect young boys? Is toxic masculinity a real thing? And how does Marxist ideology play into Americans' conceptions of gender roles? This is American Thought Leaders, and I'm Yanya Kellick. Today we sit down with Dr. Warren Farrell, an American educator and prolific author on men's and women's issues. He has the distinction of being the only man in the U.S. to be elected 3 times to the board of the National Organization for Women in New York City. We discuss how growing up without a father in the home affects boys, and how it's connected with a lack of purpose, mental illness, and a propensity for violence. We also explore Dr. Farrell's views on the traditional roles of men, breadwinner in peacetime and warrior in wartime, and how this has shifted in contemporary society, and the impact of that on America and around the world. Dr. Warren Farrell, wonderful to have you on American Thought Leaders.
I'm looking forward to being a part of this process.
Well, Dr. Farrell, tell me something about fatherhood. On our show here, a number of our folks that have been on the show have actually pointed towards lack of fathers being in the home as being, a crisis of epic proportions in America.
Yes.
And, as I was reading The Boy Crisis, or looking through it, I can't say I read every single word, I was thinking about that. I'm wondering if you could kind of speak to that.
Well, that's absolutely to the point. When I started doing the research for the boy crisis, I found that in 56 of the largest developed countries, there was boys were having problems. And when I started looking more carefully, I saw that in those largest countries, there was more permission for 2 things. One was divorce, and the other one was the permission for women to have children without being married. And within the framework of those 2 groups, the boys that were having problems were the ones without fathers from divorced families, and the boys without fathers from mother-only families. And so those were the areas. So the fatherlessness was the single biggest predictor of the boy crisis. I basically concluded that the boy crisis resides where fathers do not reside.
Absolutely fascinating. Okay, well, why don't you sketch out for us in a kind of a broader way, what is the boys crisis? Obviously, you've just mentioned something very important, but what is the span of that, the boy crisis?
In the academic area, it's boys doing worse in all 56 of those countries on every single academic subject, but especially in reading and writing. Boys doing worse, and boys are not as academically inclined. And in the United States, there is very minimal vocational education. Okay. So the boys that aren't academically inclined sort of end up feeling a sense of purposelessness. They don't have a mastery of anything. Women aren't interested in guys that don't have a job future. And so they oftentimes feel left out of both love and left out of respect. And so those boys with their testosterone not well channeled, oftentimes channel it destructively, whereas boys with fathers and mothers tend to channel their testosterone constructively.
That's absolutely fascinating. So is there something that fathers contribute to the household specifically? Is it just that there's a single parent that isn't giving enough attention? Is that the cause? Or is there something that fathers provide in these households where there are fathers that's special and unique?
Mothers who are single moms, they are overwhelmed. Overwhelm is the word that mothers who are single moms use all the time. And they often, they're working morning, noon, and night, either with the children or with their work job, and they just feel that they're not doing either one as well as they wish. And so the problem isn't mothers not working hard enough. Mothers work extremely hard, and they're some of the hardest working people in the world. But what the problem is that the more that they nurture and take care of their child, the more oftentimes they protect their child, and they're very sensitive to their every need. And that's very good for the protection part. But boys in particular, girls too, but boys in particular need more than just protection. They need encouragement to try things that are new. They need encouragement to take risks. They need encouragement to do things that are that are the result of boundary enforcement. So. Okay. So dads, for example, will typically roughhouse a lot more than moms will. Okay. And moms will look at the dads and they'll go, oh my God, I feel like I have just one more child to monitor here. And the dads are saying, okay, kids, jump off the couch and onto my back, and your job is to pin me down before I pin you down. Well, what dad doesn't understand and dad doesn't explain to moms, so moms can't hear what dads don't say, is that creates a bond. And most good dads use that bond to then enforce boundaries. Okay, yes, you pinned me down, but Jimmy, you stuck your elbow into your sister Sarah's eye. You're not allowed to do that. That's not okay. So if you do that again, there'll be no more roughhousing. So now the boy is learning to think of somebody besides himself. Okay. He's learning empathy. And we find that empathy is connected to roughhousing, where dads enforce the boundaries of saying, think of somebody besides yourself, or you'll lose the roughhousing that you want to think.
Empathy is connected to roughhousing. Yes. It sounds almost counterintuitive.
It is counterintuitive. I mean, no one, and this is why dads don't say, oh, let me roughhouse. It'll teach the child to be empathetic. Because until we sort of see that, but it's not just the roughhousing alone, it's the roughhousing combined with the boundary enforcement. And the boundary enforcement is allowed because the kids have such a bond of excitement. The kids know that dads are like a roller coaster. They're filled with excitement, but they're also filled with safety. And so when you have that combination, the dad says, we will stop the roughhousing if you do not consider your sister's needs. Then that teaches the empathy, but the next night the dad will stop the roughhousing if one of the children is not considering the other person's needs. And so the child is learning empathy because it learns that I'm going to lose what I want, roughhousing, if I don't think of somebody besides myself. Also, then the child stops the roughhousing, but the next time the child pushes too hard. But the next child, and dad stops that and says, you push too hard. Well, what's too hard? Well, that was too hard. Okay, so next time she or he tries a little bit less hard, and that either passes or doesn't pass. What the child is learning now is the difference between being assertive versus being aggressive. And so children that learn to think of others and to be assertive and not aggressive, and to have boundary enforcement, that is, they learn from that boundary enforcement postponed gratification. That is, I won't get what I want, roughhousing, until I postpone my gratification by thinking of my sister and brother and doing everything right. Oh, I don't really want to do everything right, but all right, I have to in order to get what I want, which is the roughhousing. The postponed gratification is the single biggest predictor of success. And so when a mom is really sensitive to the kid's needs and the gifts that a child has, and that's beautiful, and what the child's dream is, the child goes if the child doesn't have a dad, the child goes and tries to accomplish that dream, but often doesn't have enough postponed gratification, so it gets distracted by the next text that comes in, the next offer to play a new game, and so it doesn't accomplish what she or he wishes to accomplish. The result is they feel more ashamed of themselves. The teacher doesn't give them praise. The kids don't respect them as well. And when it comes to boy-girl time, girls go out with winners, not losers. So the boy that can't succeed sees that he's not only not respected by his parents, his teachers, and his peers, he's also girls aren't interested in him. He turns to porn, becomes addicted to porn, and the more he becomes addicted to porn, the less girls are interested in him again, only proving to himself that he's worthless. And so that's when you start having the addiction to drugs, alcohol, pornography of many types, addiction to video games, and you have boys that just can't get their life together. They become obese. The obesity leads to other sexual problems. They're more likely to move back in with their home, to their parents' home at the age of 30, 35, and then again they feel ashamed of themselves.
So it kind of breeds a kind of self-centeredness that's connected with all of these big problem areas.
Yes, self-centeredness is a very valid observation. On one level, everyone is self-centered. But what the boy who has a lot of nurturance and protection often learns to think only of his own feelings and not to think of somebody else's feelings, like his sister and his brother, or to have that type of postponed gratification that I mentioned.
Okay. And everything that you're describing, there's two things that actually come to my mind. The first of all is, I mean, certainly couldn't a mom provide all of these things that you described as the father providing previously?
The mom, first of all, can provide a lot of these things. The mom can roughhouse. The mom can do postponed gratification. Sometimes moms do more of it than dads, but they just tend. It doesn't. And just like dads can nurture and protect and be very sensitive and caring, but as a rule, dads will be more tough love oriented, and moms will be more like, well. So, for example, a mom and dad both set boundaries the same way. They both say, sweetie, you can have your ice cream as soon as you finish your peas. And children, of course, test boundaries the same way. They try to get as few peas as possible before they get their ice cream. The difference tends to be that moms will, if the child says, I've had some peas, now can I have my ice cream? Moms will feel good about themselves if they say, okay, have these 10 more peas, and then you can have your ice cream, but not finish the peas. So mom is saying, I don't want to get into a big fight over a few peas. I'll tell you what, the child, if he tries and has a few more peas, then we'll let him have his ice cream or her have her ice cream. And so the mom does that, and then the child says, aha, I can manipulate a better deal here. If I could reduce it to 10, maybe I can reduce it to 5. Has 5, and then mom says, okay, the child at least tried. Now you can have your ice cream. Dad is far more likely to say, excuse me, we have a deal. You know the deal, I know the deal, you know that I know the deal. And the deal is to finish the peas. Oh, Dad, you're so mean. Mom isn't like that. Yes, I'm Dad, she's Mom, my rules here. So you can continue complaining, by the way, too. And then there'll be no ice cream tomorrow night or tonight. And then the child begins to realize, with Dad, I have no option but to finish the peas. I can't manipulate a better deal. That's part of what creates the postponed gratification. And so children raised predominantly by dads, only 15% of them are likely to have ADHD. Children raised predominantly by moms, 30% are likely to have ADHD.
Interesting.
And one of the reasons for that, I believe, is that the child learns from the dad that she or he has to pay attention, have focused attention. With mom, the child learns that focused attention is not as required in order to be able to get that ice cream.
That's very interesting. As you're talking, this term keeps floating around in my mind that we hear a lot today. The term is toxic masculinity.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
There's been ads, very prominent ads. I think Gillette is
Gillette
one that
ad,
comes
yes,
to mind,
yes.
kind of referring to this. And generally, first of all, toxic masculinity, even by its the naming of it, it's obviously a very negative thing. First of all, can you unpackage toxic masculinity?
Yes.
And maybe the society? Is there possibly a societal obsession with this, and how does that impact the boy crisis?
Enormously. It creates an enormous culture of shame, and shame can lead to mental health problems. And so I will unpack that. So the first issue is you hear toxic masculinity, and then at the same time as you hear male privilege. Well, there is such a thing as toxic masculinity that came not from male privilege, but from male sacrifice.
Okay.
Throughout all of history, every generation had its war. And in every war, we trained our sons, in order to be a man, to be willing to be disposable in that war. And we learned to call them heroes if they sacrificed their life so the rest of us would live. So boys learned not from male privilege, but from male sacrifice to deny their own feelings, because they learned that if you're going to die in war, your feelings don't count. So if somebody calls you, a very bad name for Poles or whatever, and you're in boot camp,
right.
You learn that if you protest that, you'll just do 50 more push-ups.
Okay.
Because your job as a man was to not be concerned with being criticized, to not be concerned with being put down, to take all of this with a grain of salt, because your job was to be one more cog in the war machine. The war machine did not work well by squeaky wheels. It worked well by people doing what they needed to do. And so, yes, that developed a toxicity. The toxicity was not being able to share your feelings, not being able to say what was bothering you, having to make yourself look strong, like maybe bully somebody else to prove that you were stronger. These were toxicities, but they were toxicities that emanated from sacrifice. And what the feminists do not understand is that they say, oh, men are toxic. That's because men are entitled and they have male privilege. Well, they did develop toxicities, but those toxicities came from exactly the opposite of male privilege. It was male sacrifice that also, by the way, led to women not having to go to war, not having to disconnect from themselves. Women got much more permission to be human beings. Men were trained to be human doings. Being a human doing is not being a full self. And so historically speaking, there's this enormous difference between heroic intelligence and health intelligence. Heroic intelligence was preparation for a short life. And health intelligence is preparation for a long life. Health intelligence is a preparation for emotional intelligence, to be able to listen to really carefully to people, to draw out the best in them. But if I'm a lawyer and I'm a top-notch lawyer and you're my opposing attorney, and I say, Jan, that was really a brilliant point that you made. I don't think my client has understood that point. Client, do you understand how important that point is that Jan is making? Well, I'd be a great listener, but I'd be a terrible attorney. And so a lot of the qualities that men learn to be successful at work were often inversely related to what it takes to be successful in love.
Wow, that's extremely fascinating to me, actually. It's funny, there was a viewer that was commenting that I say fascinating too much, but I just have so many fascinating folks on the show. So, and how is this you mentioned the male privilege.
Yes.
Again, a topic that's discussed a lot and obviously connected deeply, and that comes from, let's call it this Marxist approach of oppressor versus oppressed and dividing everything. How does that fit in?
A lot. First of all, you mentioned the Marxist approach, which is right on target. Here's what happened. As many viewers may or may not know, I was on the board of directors of the National Organization for Women in New York City, and it was for quite a while. I think it's fair to say the world's leading male feminist. And so I was there at the beginning of the process of the feminist movement in the 1960s. And so I saw that we in the feminist movement, what we did is we had the heritage of the civil rights movement, where there was oppressors and oppressed. And then a lot of the early feminists, my friends and so on, they were quite left in their orientation and very tuned into Marxism. And Marxism had the people that earn more money were the oppressors and people that earn less money were the oppressed. And so then we went over to men and women, and it seemed like men on average earned more money than women did. So we called them the oppressors and women the oppressed. We said the men had privilege. We took that Marxist hierarchical framework and the civil rights hierarchical framework, and we misunderstood it. To not understand that, historically speaking, the world was not about patriarchy and privilege. The world was about the need to survive. And to survive, both mothers and fathers had obligations and responsibilities. Mothers risked their lives in childbirth, and dads risked their lives in war to protect the children that women bore. And so we had this, both sexes had roles that risked their lives, but both sexes had the same goals. And the goals was, I will do what I need to do to sacrifice myself in order to make my children's lives better than mine. Some people escaped from other countries, came to Canada and the United States not because it was more convenient, but because they hoped that their children would have a life that was better than theirs.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. You're referring to my own story here, how I ended up in North America. Yes. No, that's very interesting. Okay, so now that we've covered, oppressor, oppressed, we've looked at toxic masculinity as a concept. Let's do another term that fits into this, which is kind of the fighting against the patriarchy, which is something that I hear a lot of, right? In your view, is there a patriarchy, or what is that? How does this work in your framework?
Yes. Feminism 101 in almost all countries in the world say basically that we live in a patriarchal world dominated by men who made rules to benefit men at the expense of women.
Right.
Nothing could be further from the truth. First of all, let's take patriarchy. we lived in a world not dominated by a patriarchy, but we lived in a world dominated by the need to survive.
Okay.
To survive, most cultures divvied up the roles. And men made rules not to benefit men. Having male-only draft registration, even today in the United States, is not a benefit to men. It's saying, I'm willing to sacrifice myself so you will be protected. If we had a patriarchy that benefited men would make rules so that women were far more interested in sex than men were. So we would have leverage so that women would pay for us on dates, they would pay for our drinks, they would beg for our attention and our sexuality. This would be a rule to benefit men at the expense of women. Okay. We would have women buying diamonds for men and a way of getting engaged. We'd have women having the expectation of earning money and men having the option of either raising children, raising money, or doing some combination of both. These would be rules that would benefit women at the expense of men. But in fact, they're all rules that are the reverse in culture. That is, the men are the ones when they're married and have children that are expected to provide a higher percentage of the income than the women have. Now, when you provide a higher percentage of the income, this means you usually quit jobs that you love doing, which pay less as a rule, in order to do jobs that you don't like doing that pay more. So a man and a woman have children together, and the man is far more likely to say, I love teaching. Teaching is my passion. Now I feel, though, that I have to go into administration because it pays more, or I have to quit teaching altogether and sell insurance. Or the man that was selling insurance locally and could be home oftentimes learns that I have to sell now insurance nationwide in order to be able to make enough income to give my children a good home, good family, and a good school system, and be able to provide the income necessary now that we have 3 children and the mom decided that she doesn't want to work but a little bit. And so the whole mentality of patriarchy is reinforced by feminist beliefs that men get paid more than women do for the same work. Completely not true. Except it took me an entire book. I wrote a book called Why Men Earn More and What Women Can Do About It to explain why that isn't true. But the brief part of it is that it's not true that men earn more money than women do for the same work. What is true is that dads earn more money than moms. Because when men and women become moms and dads, men put much more time into the workplace, women put more time divided between the workplace and the home place. And so dads quit jobs like being a musician, an actor, or whatever, the love jobs, and they go into jobs that pay more. And that is what leads to that. The other part of that evidence is that when women and men are never married and never had children, women who have never been married and never have children earn 117% of what men who have never been married and never have children earn.
Oh, that's fascinating. And why?
Because usually women who have never been married and never have children focus on their careers and want to make sure that they're economically secure. Men who have never been married and never have children are usually men that one of the reasons they're not married is because they're not earning that much money, and then also they allow themselves to do jobs that they enjoy more. They allow themselves to continue being that musician, to continue being that teacher for a longer period of time because that's what they love to do.
So you say you were initially aligned with the feminist movement, but then things really changed in a few ways you described. Tell me a little more about what changed and where things have ended up.
Yes. At the beginning, when I was involved with the feminist movement, the basic message was, I am woman, I am strong. And now it's much more likely to be, I am woman, I've been wronged. And when you start focusing on women and all the ways they've been wronged and all the ways they've been victims, you start getting victim power. And you begin to hone victimhood as a fine art. And that's what recent feminism has done. It's no longer an adult feminism. It's become an adolescent feminism. And this happens oftentimes with any bureaucracies or any movements. Things, you can have a union movement, which is extremely needed, and then the unions can become so strong that they oftentimes become a burden more than the other way around. So it's not just feminism that tends to do this, but the bureaucracy of feminism, the Violence Against Women Act, for example, that puts all of the focus on violence against women, when we have known since 1970s, when there's been more than 100 studies that have been done that show that and domestically, in a home situation, there's as much violence against men as there is against women. And even the females who are interviewed acknowledge that. And so, yet this is not part of the mental consciousness.
Right.
Feminism saying that men earn $1 for each 76 cents or 80 cents that women earn for the same work. Most feminists know, or most educated feminists know, that that's just plain not accurate. And yet this perpetuation of women as victim has become so accepted that presidential candidates like Kamala Harris will say that it's not even debatable that men earn $1 for the same work as women do, even though there are 25 differences between the reasons women earn less than men do, and that women can use all 25 of those differences to earn more than men should they wish to make those sacrifices, like in hazardous jobs or working longer hours or working at jobs that they don't like as much that pay more.
One of the things that really struck me as you were speaking earlier is that boys seem to require a really strong sense of purpose. Otherwise, things really go downhill. Did I get that right?
You're right. I mean, females, historically speaking, have always had the option of having children as a sense of purpose. And today, of course, women have three possible senses of purpose: raising children, raising money, or doing some combination of both or some sequence.
Okay.
But historically for boys, our historical sense of purpose, as each generation has had its war, was for us to be disposable. Disposable in war, or disposable in the hazardous jobs in the workplace, or disposable by climbing as high as we could on the ladder, working 60, 70 hours a week, maybe dying of a heart attack, what the Japanese call karoshi, which is death at work or death from overwork.
Okay.
And so the good news is that today we need fewer soldiers. Women are helping to support the family to a much greater degree than it's ever happened in the past. And so that's the good news. The bad news is the good news. The bad news is that we've lost the sense of purpose. But the good news is that we have more options as a male now than we ever had before. So while we no longer have the pressure on us to have to be a soldier in order to be a hero in the culture and be admired by our dads and moms and people in the culture. And secondly, we don't have to be the sole breadwinner anymore. We can have that shared to a greater degree. But what I have found when I did the research for the boy crisis is that there is today both the boys that are having problems have two things. They have this purpose void, okay, combined with a dad void. Okay. And here's why that is terrible. That turns out very badly. When the mother has the boy, she, as I was mentioning before, she finds all these wonderful things about the boys, and creates the boy's dream with him. But if the boy doesn't have the paternal discipline to carry out that dream, he starts becoming disappointed and ashamed in himself, and before we know it, he's afraid to dream. And that really damages the boy's psyche. And so this is, secondly, the boy without a dad doesn't have a role model. A woman, a female being raised in a female-dominated home, or with a single mother, she at least has a same-sex role model. Okay. And she has more social permission to ask for help, express her feelings, complain, and cry. The boy has less permission to ask for help, express his feelings, complain, and cry, and doesn't have a male role model. In divorce cases, it's often worse. Two other things are often happening. The boy will sometimes hear negative things about the dad from the mom, and he'll look in the mirror and say, well, gee, if my dad is a liar, okay, irresponsible, and maybe a thief or a narcissist, maybe I'm that too. I am looking in the mirror after all. And so the boy begins to sort of feel really badly about himself if there's any bad mouthing that goes on after divorce. Secondly, after divorce, whether it's true or not, many boys feel that they are abandoned by their dad. And especially when the father may quietly be in law court fighting to be more involved with the dad is oftentimes not wanting to say that he's in law court fighting, and so the boy then feels abandoned by the dad, combined with hearing the negative things about the dad.
So, you seem to put men and women in quite distinct camps, let's just say, right? Very male characteristics, female characteristics, strong tendencies. We're hearing a lot, again, in the media and so forth about gender fluidity. There's a unlimited number of genders, and the traditional way of thinking about men and women doesn't apply. How does that fit into what you're discussing?
Yes, men and women, both are sometimes people will say to me, what is it, nature or nurture? And I say yes, and they go, what? Well, wait a minute, what do you mean yes? Is it nature or nurture? And I go, well, it's about 70% nature and about 70% nurture. And they go, your math is really bad. But the truth is that we have, in our biological inheritance, we have many mechanisms for adaptation. We have something called the rostral cingulate zone in our brain, which every time we get approval, from social approval, we respond by trying to do more of what gives us social approval. So that's both biological and it's also social. That's built into our system so that we could unite as groups of people to be able to fight off other people.
Okay.
We had to all be Catholics, and then we'd have a stronger Poland, and so that we could resist, the forces from the
Sure.
outside, and so on. So this biological and cultural inheritance means that yes, gender fluidity is accurate. There is such a thing as gender fluidity. If you start getting a lot of people saying, we respect women more than men, and and trans kids will be the new type of honored child, we will have many more people move from male to female, and to be trans and be whatever the society tells them is honored at that point in history. I mean, if we can get people to be willing to die in order to be called hero, if social bribes are that important, so people will die to get approval, you can see how, if we're saying that the new approval will come from trans or gender fluidity, we can see how kids will want to be part of the new approval system. Now, is it healthy or not healthy? It becomes unhealthy when we are unbecoming who we are naturally prone to be, because we're trying to get a new type of approval from a new group.
It sounds like we have some very serious decisions to make as a society.
Yes.
That's the implication of, I think, of what you're saying. Okay, then, so let's talk about the educational system a bit. I have two nephews, who are, in very, very early in the education system now. And I've also been hearing from all sorts of folks that boys are being taught in school very commonly to be a lot less like these traditional male roles and so forth, and that's part of the strategy or part of the approach. What is the impact of that?
The impact is shame, and the impact is boys saying, "I'm really sorry I was born a boy." The impact is fathers, for the first time in recorded history, are saying, I would love to play ball with my son and have a boy as the next child, but when I look at the world today, I realize that a girl has more advantages, and I feel that for the sake of the child, I want to have a girl. When boys go into school, they are being told that, about male privilege. They're being told that they're part of the patriarchy. They're being told that there's a book, if they're readers, they run across books with titles like The End of Men.
Okay.
Well, this is the first time in history where someone has grown up hearing that it's going to be the end of their gender, and hearing that their gender is associated with toxicity. There are so many parts of masculinity that we must not throw out like the baby with the bathwater. Okay. We must value the fact that almost all our inventions have been created by men, but not men just because they're males with physical bodies, but because men have been trained and selected for taking risks, trying things that are new. And in the process of taking risks and trying things that are new and failing, they're also more likely to, through those risks, to invent the iPhones that we're using, to invent most of the things that are part of our technology. And if we just keep putting men down and telling them that all masculinity is toxic, we're not going to be having men do those types of things. Men are told that if they succeed, it's because of their male privilege. If they don't succeed, it's because they're losers. If they're told in school when it gets to be boy-girl time or dating time, no matter what your dating choices are, they're told that if the boy knows when he's in 7th, 8th, 9th grade that his testosterone is strong enough to make him want to be sexual with more than half of the girls in his class. But if he were to act on his feelings, the response of the girls would be that he's acting too quickly and appropriately, and he might be considered a sexual harasser or a date rapist. On the other hand, the boys that are cautious constantly report to me that they're told that they're wimps and that they notice that the girls are not going out with the boys who are cautious. They're going out with boys who are risk takers, and they're going out with the football players.
So it's kind of a no-win situation for the boys.
They feel so much in a no-win situation, and this is toxic. Now there are parts of masculinity that are toxic, but those are, as I mentioned before, those things they emanated from male sacrifice. But that is not being taught in school. The female teachers and some male teachers will say, we're going to read books by female authors because the discrimination against female authors was so great. It wasn't the discrimination against female authors. It was that men learned that their role was to do things to make a living for their family, and so more men made their living being an author, and millions of men wanted to be authors but couldn't make enough of a living to do that. They withdrew from the process, and the biggest discrimination in the culture today is not the gender discrimination to get to the top of the ladder. The biggest discrimination in the country today is the gender discrimination against not giving men equal opportunities to be dads, not calling on our sons to be father warriors, so that instead of telling them that we will value them if they die, if they kill or are killed, saying that we will value you as father warriors if you love and be loved at home. This is the new opportunity we have to create for our sons. Not because they're men, they need to be fathers only, but this option needs to be out there and is strong for men to be able to be dads, as we have given in the last 50 years to women to be executives or presidential candidates.
Yeah, and so as you're speaking, I'm thinking, there's no reason women couldn't be in the society today, play all those roles, be the risk taker, try that job, so forth. So is this simply because the roles have changed sufficiently where women are playing much more of a male role? They're kind of playing both roles. They're playing both roles, but they're not completely playing the male role even as they're complaining about it. So for example, girls in school are not being taught sex is good in many respects, and girls, if you want to choose, you have a responsibility to ask men out and pay for men and to pick them up as often as they ask you out, pay for you and pick you up. That equality is not just about pick and choose liberation where you get to blame men when they go too far too fast. Okay. Equality is about taking responsibility as well. And so let's take the place where a guy does reach over and take a girl's hand, and the girl isn't interested. But they're out on a date, which implies that she had an overall interest, but maybe he reached out too soon or too inappropriately. And so we can at least teach girls in school that if a guy does reach out to you, and your job is to say no if you're not interested, but number two, your job is to say something like, or for the culture to imply, that if you change your mind down the road a bit, that you tell the boy that when and if you do change your mind, you will then risk rejection the next time, because she's not even risking rejection. She already knows that he's interested. Right. And any woman who's fair at all knows that if a man asks her out on a date, the chances of him being interested in being sexual with her are somewhere between 99% and 100%. And so there's not really a fear of rejection. So why not have
females share the risks of rejection when there really are few risks of rejection to begin with. But it's also a way of empowering our daughters to take risks, is to ask them to, if you're interested in a guy in class, don't resort to veto power, where you flirt with him and hope he asks you out, because veto power only gives you a yes-no option.
Okay.
What you need to resort is original choice power. When you're interested in a guy, you go up to him and make your choice, him, and you take, but that guy may not be interested in you. Now you're risking rejection. And so now you're being prepared to be a risk taker in life.
So given the current reality in the educational system, we also have this, the cultural Marxism we've been discussing that has seeped in. What is your prescription for a step forward to try to solve this boy crisis?
Yeah, it's very hard to do it one step at a time, which is one of the reasons I've been sort of talking about creating a White House Council on Boys and Men, is because we really have to say boys' issues need to be part of our national agenda, just like we had 1,000 messages out there saying that girls' and women's issues had to be part of our national agenda. And the truth was that it was very important to expand the options that girls and women have. But now it's important to expand the options that boys and men have and get away from the toxic masculinity. If we started saying the things about black people that we say about men, that they're toxic, that they're all entitled and so on, we'd be called racist immediately. And so there's an enormous poisoning in the culture. Feminism has become its own form of toxicity. And so this really needs to be confronted, and people need to say this, the fundamental understanding that needs to be changed is the understanding that we are all in the same family boat. When only one sex wins, both sexes lose. And that is not happening. So the atmosphere has to change. And then part of that changing of atmospheres means we need to have more male teachers in schools. So there should be at least equal numbers of male teachers in elementary school as there is female teachers, so that children who are raised predominantly by moms in an inner city especially don't go from female-only homes to female-only school systems. And then we say to ourselves, I wonder why our son is looking for a drug dealer or a gang leader to get respect and have an authoritarian role model. Boys need structure. They need that structure to happen not from gang leaders, but from good male role models. We need to get more males involved in faith-based communities where they can talk to other males of their same age and see that those males have masks that they're wearing, and that a good faith-based leader can help the boy remove that mask and see that all the boys around him have vulnerabilities. We need to make sure that we have recess so that boys can have physical activity, because the Centers for Disease Control finds that every moment spent in recess does more good for studying for a test than every moment spent studying for that test. And so we need to have vocational education. Boys who have no sense of purpose, like we talked about before, don't become destructive. When testosterone is not channeled constructively, it is channeled destructively. And so vocational education needs to be as important in the United States as it is in Japan, where about 30% of children go to vocational education tracks. And then when they graduate from the vocational education programs, 99.6% of them get jobs. Here in the United States, when boys are not academically inclined, they often fail out of high school. When they fail out of high school, the unemployment rate in their 20s is more than 20%, 5 times what it is the national unemployment rate is on average.
So this is actually the last question that I was kind of curious about. How is this all connected with incarceration, the current situation in the prison system, and so forth?
There are 3 groups of boys that are dad deprived, and those dad deprived boys hurt. And when boys who hurt us. Here's what I mean by this: 93% of our prisoners are male, but of those 93% males, more than 90% of them are dad-deprived males. So these boys hurt from dad deprivation, and then they commit crimes and they hurt us. Now let's look at a different population, mass shooters. Since Columbine, about 90% of the mass shooters are not just boys, but they're dad-deprived boys. Now let's look at ISIS recruits. More than 90% of the ISIS recruits are dad-deprived. Both the males and the much smaller percentage of females who are ISIS recruits are dad-deprived. So you have this enormous group of boys who are hurting us because they have been hurt. They haven't had their testosterone channeled well. They're trying to get attention in one way or the other, depending on their community and their culture. They may be in an inner city area and they feel that they kill somebody that robbed them of part of their territory to sell drugs. They may be in any number of situations for different reasons. They feel like they've been a loser at school, that nobody's paying attention to them, but their mom and dad have told them that they're a very sensitive boy. And if they have a mom only and they haven't had a chance to sort of do some of that postponed gratification, they end up feeling ashamed of themselves. And at some point they say, I'll get people to wish that they paid attention to me and valued me.
So, you know, there's a term that you've used as well, and we'll kind of wrap up shortly, I think. But there's this term that you've used, a warrior. Is it? I can't
Father
remember.
Warrior.
Father
Yes.
warriors,
Yes.
right? So this is also part of your prescription, as I
Yes.
understand it. So, what is a father warrior, and how does
Yes.
this fit in?
Part of the new message I want to send to our culture is that we need fathers desperately. But there's discrimination in the culture against fathers. When there's divorces, fathers have to fight to be involved with the children equally oftentimes, while women are oftentimes seen as having the right to the children. There's not a culture that we see advertisements on TV where the father is a bumbling jerk or whatever. And so we have to overcome those barriers. We're warriors overcome barriers, and men, and we need our fathers desperately, but we need men to have the courage and the strength to overcome the social discrimination against men saying, I'm a man, I'm a really wonderful man, and what do? I'm a full-time dad. Now this doesn't mean that all men should be full-time dads. It means that the type of respect that a father has should be strong enough that those men that are inclined toward being full-time dads, whose personalities are oriented toward that they don't feel ashamed and embarrassed and less than a man if they decide that that's the route that they wish to take. And that women, and one of the best ways for this to happen is men will become full-time dads when women are more interested in dating men who are full-time dads. When women love men and have sex with men for doing certain things, if women had said, as of next week, we will begin to have sex and love, emotionally love, men who walk on their hands, there would be hand walking contests within a week that men would be structuring, and then we would be walking on one hand.
So, that's a very interesting prescription. I haven't heard that before. Well, so we can finish up here. Wonderful to have you on American Thought Leaders.
Thank you. It's been really a pleasure.